Hey VC, it's Dave in Texas here, and I thought I would do a video, enter a contest for a dance channel which is called Dots and Loops. I'm pretty sure most of the members here are familiar with this channel. He's up in Canada and has a bunch of videos, and I've seen quite a few of them. You know, I don't always comment sometimes. A lot of times probably I don't comment, but I probably have before. And he showed albums that he buys when he goes out of town, and I know he's done some videos with his son as well, and just a lot of different type videos about a lot of different, a variety of music. You know, he likes psychedelic music and a lot of different things, so check his channel out if you haven't already. But he's got his contest is I Like It, and he wants you just to show some albums that you like, regardless if anybody else likes it or not, or maybe albums that critics have not so much liked, but you still like it regardless. Maybe albums that critics have panned. And I thought I'd start out by just showing some albums that I like. And here's one right here. This is Guitar Solos 2, and it has 4 different musicians on it. Derek Bailey, Fred Frith, Englishman, Hans Reichel, and G.F. Fitzgerald. And they don't play together. Each guitarist is just giving a song or two to play, and this is prepared guitar, prepared solo guitar, and a lot of it's just kind of atmospheric. It's also sort of improvisational, so if you like that kind of thing, I mean, I like it. I don't listen to it a lot, but when I get in the mood for it, I really like it. Back when I was going to school, I did not like the Carpenters. I was more into something like Jimi Hendrix and the Rolling Stones and the Beatles, of course, and a lot of other bands. I kind of thought the Carpenters were a little, I don't know, like smarmy, or playing kind of like old folks rock or something. But ever since I got out of college, I've you know, rethought about it and got to where I really do like their music. They have really good harmonies and arrangements on their songs, and yeah, I've really formed an appreciation for their music in my later years. So the Carpenters. Now, I did like the Everly Brothers when I was growing up. I don't see too many people mention them in the VC. But yeah, really good vocal harmonies, and I'm sure they influenced a lot of different bands that do harmonies, like perhaps the Beach Boys or Crosby, Stills and Nash and stuff like that. But this is a greatest hits package, and they had a lot of them back in the day. They are somewhere in between the maybe a little bit of rockabilly and maybe a little bit of country music is in there, along with early rock and roll. But for sure the Everly Brothers were really great musicians, and if you can find anything by them, I'd say pick it up. You'd probably really enjoy it, particularly if you can find like a greatest hits album. This is an EC album by the bass player Bar Phillips, and I don't know, a lot of people kind of shy away from the ECM label, but I like a lot of the stuff on their label. This is his album 3 Day Moon, and he plays with a couple other musicians on here. Very atmospheric album. It's got Terry Ripdahl on it, who plays the guitar, guitar synthesizer and organ, Dieter Freischner sounds like a German name, on synthesizer, and Turlock Gertu on tabla and percussion. Real dreamy, sort of like the cover, atmospheric and exploratory all the same time, but yeah, Bar Phillips. Now back in the day before the internet, I used to buy a lot of publications, and I've still got a few Rolling Stones around the house, but I didn't want to dig them out. And I used to buy Goldmine magazine, and there was Crawdaddy, Circus magazine, you know, and a lot of magazines back in the day that you could read to kind of keep you up on what was happening in the music community, what bands were fashionable at the time. And this is the first publication of the Rolling Stone Record Guide. They came out with the second one after this that had a blue cover on it. This one stops at 1979, and so any albums after that date, or probably 78, aren't going to be in here. But a lot of the time, a lot of the critics in here would totally miss writing about different people, and I don't know if that's because they just really didn't have enough time to listen to the albums and then write about it, or maybe they just didn't like that style of music. I know for one thing, Rolling Stone, they didn't care much for progressive music, and so anyway, the way this thing is split up or is done is there are several different writers and reviewers in here, and of course Rolling Stone, if you've ever read it, they're kind of rate their music this way, sort of rated in stars. Of course the bottom one down here is a square, and then you've got a 1 star, 2 stars, and 5 stars is a great album, and you go on down. The worst you could be is this one down here, and they didn't rate very many that way, but they did rate a few, and they rated a lot of 1 star ratings as well. This bottom one is like the bottom of the stockpile, says it's a worthless records that need never or should never have been created, reserved for the most pathetic bathwater. The 1 star rating says poor records in which even technical competence is at question, or which are remarkably ill-conceived. So neither one of those ratings there would be very good. But a couple of the ratings that they rated that way, here you have this album here that I like. This is a Vangelis's China album, and sort of has a little bit of Asian influence on it. Really nice album though, and I like a lot of Vangelis's other albums. And they almost rated all of his albums 1 star, which, like I said, is not a very high rate. Is really bad rating. Poor records, which even technical competence is at question. Now, you wouldn't really think that about Vangelis at this date and time, but here's what they said: is he's a Greek piano prodigy, makes his records in England. Allegedly, this is rock, but if that's true, then the guy who wrote the soundtrack for 2001 is Buddy Holly. Classical Mediocrity, and that's by Dave Marsh, who is one of the guys that put out this book here. Another album that I kind of like is this album here. This is a French band called Magma, and this is their live album, and the leader of the band is this guy here, which is their drummer. My finger's pointing, this guy here. But his name is Christian Vander, and the ensemble has members that kind of go and come a little bit, and there was many of the members that stayed with the band. but their sound is sort of fusiony and sort of jazz, more inclined to jazz than I'd say rock. But at the same time, they were a little bit avant-garde, a little bit cerebral. Sometimes their stuff can be kind of meditative, but at the same time, they can be rather confrontational as well. And Rolling Stone really hated this band and gave everything either 1 star or really even the square, which is the lowest rating of all. And they started out talking about Christian Vander. They say a German gypsy who was taught to play drums by Evelyn Jones and Chet Baker. Now, I thought Christian Vander was French, but maybe he was born in Germany and moved to France, I don't know. But he says he's played with Chick Corea and John Coltrane and had this typically Teutonic concept. He goes on to talk about what he was into, and it's sort of they refer to it as being neoclassical, neo-romanticism and classical Greek tragedy all in one. But for all its pretensions, Magma sounds like the worst possible slowed down clone of Deep Purple or Tangerine Dream undergoing a bout of colitis. And then they end it with, says, do the locomotion, whatever that means. It's just sort of a flippant remark. And that again is by Dave Marsh. And like I said, Dave Marsh, if he liked something, he really liked it, and if he hated it, he just didn't get it at all. And he didn't like anything very cerebral. He didn't like anything very abstract or avant-garde or whatever, and that kind of shows right here. And another thing about the Rolling Stone reviews is like maybe if they panned something, early on, 10 or 15 years down the road, they'd revise it and come out and say, hey, this album's the best album you ever heard, and like totally discounting the earlier review. Or if you weren't familiar with the earlier review and then you come back years later and you see this is the best album, you go, wow, y'all panned it when it first came out. And some of the albums that they have panned in here is really surprising. I'll try and leave a link that I was looking at today on the web about some of the albums that they wrote about. But one of the bands that they didn't care for at all was Black Sabbath. And they gave all the Black Sabbath albums 1 star except for the second one, Paranoid. And they just didn't think that they had very much talent at all. They say their high point was Paranoid, a better example of their goofy malevolence than the We Sold Our Soul for Rock and Roll anthology. These would-be English kings of heavy metal are eternally foiled by their stupidity and intractability. So, that you can see they didn't care much for Black Sabbath either. One of the bands that might surprise you that they didn't care for, or at least starting out, was Led Zeppelin. And mostly it was because of their drummer, John Bonham, which these days most people laud him as being a really great rock drummer. And one of the reviewers, and I think it was Dave Marsh, said about John Bonham, said he was insurmountably flawed and clinically incompetent. They've gone on to say stuff like Freddie Mercury had a passable rock voice. For the Grateful Dead, they say they were the worst band in creation. For Jimi Hendrix's first album, Are You Experienced? And his second album, Axis Bold as Love, they said, Axis Bold as Love sounds like a junk heap. His songs are basically a bore, and the Experience has the problem of vocal inability. And I'm pretty sure they revised those as the as the years went on. Here's another one that I've always really enjoyed, and it got 1 star. Now 1 star again stands for a poor record in which even technical competence is at question, or which are remarkably ill-conceived. That's 1 star. Technically incompetent. Well, here they are. They give 1 star to this album here. This is David Crosby's first solo album, If Only I Could Remember My Name, which I always thought was a really classic album. I liked it the first time I heard it, and I think a lot of people recognize it as being a great album. But it's got all these other musicians from the San Francisco Bay Area that help him with this. You've got Jerry Garcia on here, and you've got the guys from the Jefferson Airplane, Grateful Dead. Here's Graham Nash, Neil Young, Grace Slick, you know, a lot of different people on here, and it's a real kind of moody album in a way, in some ways, but also kind of folky, and it's really a great album. But here's what they say about it. They gave it 1 star, and it says, interesting only as Crosby's first and only solo attempt at the time they wrote this. Otherwise, this album is a washout. So I don't really feel that this album is really technically incompetent at all. I really find it kind of a classic album by these times. So anyway, their first impressions on a lot of these albums were a washout, if I can coin what he just said. And them panning a lot of these albums over time is laughable at best. But sometimes it's best to, you know, if you want to read criticism, just to take it with a grain of salt. And the best thing you could do is maybe go on a site like Spotify or Amazon and listening to parts of it and just make up your own mind. And that's the best, I would say, the best test to whether or not you want to buy something. So anyway, that's my entry into Dan's contest. I'll try and leave a link below so that if you're interested in you know, entering it as well, and if you want to subscribe to Dan's Dots and Loops, I'm sure he'd be glad for you to subscribe as well. So anyway, hope you are enjoying your spring and finding some good albums to buy. This is Dave. We'll talk to you later.